Hello and welcome to PFF Now. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Ari Meirov and Brad Spielberger. Ari, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really, really well, and it's been an amazing season so far, and we really don't really know what's going on in both conferences. It's remarkable what's going on. The wild card race in both conferences is up for grabs, so it's been a great season so far. And tonight's matchup, Buffalo and New England, is going to be unbelievable. I think people are back in reality right now. New England's the number one seed in the AFC, so 1 year off, and they're back. So it's an incredible year so far.
New England back on top. We got Alabama once again, the one seed heading into the CFP in college as well. I know we're NFL focused, but very excited for that as well. I think it'll be two great games in the semifinals. So a lot of good football ahead. I can't believe we're this far along already.
Let's get into the news of the weekend. First off, Carolina Panthers made some headlines right during that 1 p.m. game window, firing offensive coordinator Joe Brady. This came as, I'd say, a pretty big surprise to everyone around the NFL, even including players on the Panthers. That's really the sense that I got, is that they were not expecting this to happen. They were not anticipating this move of Joe Brady getting fired, during their week 13 bye. So definitely a big surprise. I don't think that Joe Brady will be out of a job for long, but I think it's just kind of worth noting Joe Brady's ascent to offensive coordinator. He was an offensive assistant with the Saints for a couple of years, got hired by LSU as their wide receivers / passing game coordinator coach. And then he goes from not even really calling plays outside of the red zone at LSU straight to offensive coordinator with the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers offense has struggled for the last couple of years, but like I said, no one really expected him to get fired at midseason, especially since he was actually interviewing for head coaching jobs as recently as last year. So, Ari, what's your initial reaction to this news?
Yeah, it really did feel surprising when it happened. And when you really try to look at it from a big picture, maybe it shouldn't be that surprising. I mean, Brady, of course, was the splashy hire from LSU last offseason, but head coach Matt Rule and Brady never worked together before that. So their first season together was in a COVID year where there are so many restrictions. They signed Teddy Bridgewater, who had experience with Brady in New Orleans, and it just didn't work out. And if you remember, after the season, Bridgewater, who is a very quiet guy, so the Panthers didn't practice the 2-minute drill or red zone offenses, which is something he said he's never seen before. So there simply seemed to be a disconnect between head coach and offensive coordinator, especially with how much they want to run the ball. But the other thing that I want to mention is just the timing of all this is really fascinating. The Panthers just dumped this news on everyone during the 1 o'clock games, around 1:20 Eastern time. It just happened. Everyone quickly reacted and everyone just moved on. Rule has been getting asked about Brady basically every single week this season. Throughout the year, he said he had his support, and now he pulls the plug on him. Rule got a really big contract to become the head coach of the Panthers. They've had a revolving door at quarterback, and they're still looking for the right guy. I don't think Rule is in danger. However, the owner in Carolina is David Tepper, and Tepper is heavily involved in everything there. Some owners stay back, some owners are in and out. Tepper is always in. He's there for everything. And if everything continues to go sideways, you start to wonder if he starts thinking maybe I should do something here. Again, I don't think it gets to that point, but Tepper has shown he's fine with eating the money and looking elsewhere. So I'm really curious to see where this ends up going for Carolina, because I feel like this Joe Brady story, there might be more to it.
Agreed 100%. And I think the only way to characterize this season in Carolina is erratic. I mean, so many moves they've made. They quit on a couple weeks later. Even Sam Darnold, you go ahead, trade significant capital for him, commit to his fully guaranteed fifth-year option, and basically through half a season, you're done with him. You sign Dan Arnold at tight end, trade him a couple weeks into the year, trade Denzel Perriman at linebacker, who now leads the NFL in tackles. Just keep doing these moves where there's obviously not a long-term vision. It's very confusing. And as for Brady, I do think, as you said, there probably is more to this. Obviously, we know there's openings in college in Oregon and Oklahoma. There are a lot of things going on. Even at LSU, Brian Kelly has struggled to bring any assistants along. So I agree. I do not expect Joe Brady to be without a job for a long time. And it's hard for me to see this as anything besides a scapegoating, frankly.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see where Joe Brady lands. I would expect probably the most, the easiest fit for him would be to land as an offensive coordinator in the college ranks. Maybe a lower tiered college program would be open to hiring him as a head coach. I'm not quite sure if, this stint with the Carolina Panthers would get him back at an NFL offensive coordinator job, but maybe a position coach, something to that degree. But it definitely is interesting to see how many moves the Panthers have made this season, how many splash signings. It seems like they've made like half the headlines in the NFL this year, or half the bigger ones with Cam Newton and Joe Brady and Stephon Gilmore and all these massive things happening there in Carolina. But I do think that, it's certainly possible that there's something more going on here. But I do think that with the way that the offense has struggled, it's at least worth trying for Matt Rule to go back to the play caller that he was using back in college at Baylor to see if that works a little bit better, to see if that can pull the offense together in the last third of the season. And if they weren't going to keep Joe Brady anyway in 2022 and beyond, now is the time when it's really worth them seeing what can work moving forward. But let's get into some other news that broke since our last show. That's that Antonio Brown suspended 3 games for submitting a fake COVID vaccine card to the NFL. It has been reported that he has since gotten vaccinated, but just the fact that he was, I guess, for lack of a better term, pretending to be vaccinated at least at the start of the off-season workout program for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That was enough for the Buccaneers to suspend Antonio Brown for the NFL to suspend Antonio Brown for 3 games. And I'm curious to see where this story goes from here as well, because the NFL has said that they will be investigating other vaccine cards from other teams, and it's pretty easy for the players who are actually vaccinated on team grounds through the team. It's a pretty good bet that those guys are actually vaccinated. But for anyone who was not vaccinated through the team, I think that this does kind of open up Pandora's box a little bit to see whether their vaccine cards are legit and what's going to go on from there. But I could see this being, if the NFL does take this seriously and does actually start looking into these vaccine cards, being a pretty major story, because I think that we've basically all heard at this point that there's a lot of suspicion about how many players out of the 90% plus are actually vaccinated. And it's tough to even prove whether or not someone has been vaccinated or not. But it seems like the story that Antonio Brown and his Buccaneers teammates submitted to the NFL fell apart pretty quickly. So some of these players who are not vaccinated, I certainly encourage them to get vaccinated, but they also might want to get some stories together and get some proof that they actually were vaccinated if the NFL is going to take this seriously.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that I don't think will go away right away. And the number that the NFL put out there is 80% of players who are vaccinated actually got the shot at the team facilities. So they're good. It's the other 16% that we're looking at. Like, where'd you guys get it from? And could we have the proof that you actually got it? So it'll be interesting to see if the NFL actually goes and tries to look into that. But specifically about Antonio Brown, I think the whole big picture outlook on Antonio in Tampa Bay is interesting, because for him to even be in Tampa Bay with Bruce Arians in the first place was something that was not even supposed to happen. Like, if you go back to last offseason, Bruce Arians was like asked point blank about the idea of signing him, and this was his answer. Let's put it up here.
What's the likelihood AB gets back in Tampa? Because I know he has, or at least Tom has had an affinity for him because of his work ethic. Forget all the other antics, but just how he works on the field and in practice it's top of the line.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
There you go.
Not going to happen. There's no room.
Yeah.
And probably not enough money, but it's just not going to happen. It's not a fit here.
Interesting. Well, there is room though, because you lost Perriman. I don't know if he says I'm coming in on the veteran minimum, coach. I just want to play with Tom. You still wouldn't find a way to get him in?
No.
Wow. Is it?
All right, so that was last offseason, right? And they end up signing him after an 8-game suspension. And it's safe to say that Tom Brady probably had a lot of influence in that. But after signing him, Bruce Arians talked to Peter King, and he was asked, are you going to keep this guy if he makes one mistake? And Bruce answered, if he makes one mistake, he's gone. So here we are now. This is a pretty big no-no what he did here. He was pretty good last year, didn't have any off-field stuff during his time in Tampa Bay. But the reality here is if Antonio Brown just pays his dues to people, none of this even happens.
Right.
But he allegedly owes $10,000 to his former chef, and his former chef had enough with him, and he got it out there that Antonio Brown was using a fake vaccine card, and this all exploded in his face. Now, one more thing I want to say about this is that a lot of people on social media were talking about Aaron Rodgers when it comes to Antonio Brown. And it's important just to mention how big of a difference it is what Antonio did and what Aaron Rodgers did. And let's put it like this. The NFL made rules this past year where if you're vaccinated, you can do A, B, and C. And if you're unvaccinated, you cannot do A, B, and C. And simply put, Antonio Brown actually used a fake vaccine card, and everyone, including the NFL and his teammates and his coaches, thought that he was vaccinated. So he was doing A, B, and C, even though he was not allowed to do that. Aaron Rodgers, on the other hand, he misled all of us. He misled the media. He misled the fans. But the Packers, the NFL, Roger Goodell, and his teammates all knew that he was vaccinated, and he was walking around with a mask in the building. The one thing he did not do was a mask in front of the media, and he got fined because he went to a Halloween party, and as an unvaccinated player, you cannot do that. But he did follow most of the protocols after the NFL investigated him, and they ended up just fining him. So that was the difference between Antonio Brown and Aaron Rodgers. Again, we are not condoning what Aaron Rodgers did. We still think it was something that he should have done more properly. But what he did and what Antonio Brown did are two completely different things.
You know, I think Antonio Brown, interesting too, is we're going to focus on him as, of course, we are. He jump-started that offense last year that led to the Super Bowl. They're 5-0 this year when he does play. But you look at their safety situation now, because he roped in a young player, which I think should go a long way in determining this, ropes in safety Mike Edwards to also follow this scheme. They're down Jordan Whitehead to injury already. Now Mike Edwards is also suspended. And they have Richard Sherman is reportedly going to start cross-training at safety. They had Ross Cockrell and Pierre Desir, two veteran cornerbacks who are also cross-training at safety. I mean, he has created an issue that doesn't just affect himself. And finally, Bruce Arians is a cancer survivor, and there's an article out. They have an 83-year-old offensive assistant who works very closely with Bruce Arians. It goes beyond football, and I think that because of the impact he could potentially have on other people, other players, you know, I think they're probably leaning towards moving on, but it'll be interesting to see how they handle it.
Yeah. Antonio Brown is PFF's fifth highest graded wide receiver this season, 87.4 offensive grade. And I could certainly understand the reasoning for if the Buccaneers do decide to move on from Antonio Brown. But I also think that if they do decide to move on from him, another team would probably pick him up pretty quickly, because this is a separate issue from what was going on when he was released by the New England Patriots back in 2019. Obviously, it's still a serious issue, but I think that it's something that teams could probably look past a little bit easier since Antonio Brown is vaccinated at this point. You know, it's not necessarily, I think that some team would look at it as, all right, this isn't necessarily our problem. That's something they did on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now we can bring in one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL for a playoff run. And I'm not sure what team that would be, but that certainly has to be part of the discussion for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, is that, okay, if we let this guy go, it not only hurts our offense, it might also hurt our chances of actually winning a championship if another team that we're competing with at some point is going to bring him on. And like I said, I mean, Antonio Brown's been so good this season. I do think that he would probably find a job pretty quickly, as long as he doesn't, you know, have any other outbursts or any other issues in the meantime. So it would certainly be a difficult discussion for them. You know, you also rope in the Tom Brady element. Is that, you know, is Tom Brady going to be happy if the Buccaneers do decide to release him? And, you know, the Buccaneers have won 3 straight games now at this point, but 2 of those came against the Giants and the Atlanta Falcons. They played close against the Colts. I wouldn't say that they had a very sizable victory over the Atlanta Falcons, but, you know, they might even want to look at next week, see what happens against the Buffalo Bills before they actually make a decision about whether or not they want to do this, because I think that that's really going to be a determining point for them, is that, all right, if we look legit against the Buffalo Bills with Antonio Brown, that might ease the concern a little bit of releasing him. But if they struggle, which, you know, we've said it before, Tom Brady looks the most comfortable this season throwing to Rob Gronkowski and throwing to Antonio Brown. And that's despite the fact that the 2 of the other wide receivers on that team, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, are among the best in the NFL. So it's a really interesting situation. and it's not going to be a simple one for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but it does seem like they are at least going to put that off for the meantime until they actually have to make that decision. Let's get into some injuries from over the weekend. Unfortunately, there were quite a bit of them like usual. I wanted to talk about Ravens cornerback Marlon Humphrey suffered a shoulder injury. Ian Rappaport tweeted that he is suspected to be out for the season, but it does seem like there are going to be some other tests to see if he could come back at some point. The Ravens injury situation is just unbelievable this season.
Yeah.
The fact that they are 8-4, and I'll list off the players that they're missing already. J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, their top 2 running backs. Deshaun Elliott, talented safety. Marcus Peters, one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL. Ronnie Stanley, their left tackle. Derek Wolfe, really good interior defensive lineman. Now you throw Marlon Humphrey in there as well. And you add in the fact that Lamar Jackson really hasn't played up to his full potential this season as well. He's certainly shown spurts of that elite quarterback play, but he's also struggled a bit. And obviously that's even expected without some of their best offensive weapons and linemen and defenders. So I don't know. I'm curious to see how long the Ravens can actually maintain this success this season with all these injuries piling up, because you see all the studies that injuries are almost as important as anything else when it comes to winning a Super Bowl. The teams that stay healthy are the ones who have the sustained success during the season. And the Ravens, they start out with a ton of injuries, and now they just keep piling up. So it would be really big if they can get Humphrey back at some point, but it's certainly not looking great at this point.
It's not looking great at all. And you mentioned the offense, but, here's the other thing about the offense. The offense has scored their last 4 games, they scored 10, 16, 16, and 19. That's not the Baltimore offense we're used to. And, they are, as you said, one of the most banged up teams in the league, and they have first place in the AFC North right now. But when you look at their remaining schedule, and it's really no walk in the park. They have Cleveland next week or this week, Green Bay, Cincinnati, the Rams, and then the Steelers again. This AFC North division is going to come down to the wire. And if Lamar Jackson is playing like this, and they're missing all those key pieces right now on that team, the fact that they have survived up until now, like you said, Doug, is impressive. But it really could catch up to them here in these next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, John Harbaugh even said himself, the reason they went for 2 at the end of the game was because they were out of cornerbacks. That was his direct quote. So, I mean, it just shows kind of what they're dealing with. And I think, like you said, it's been a big storyline across the NFL, a lot of teams. I think another big injury this past week is Washington football team tight end Logan Thomas, who had just come back from injury and now, unfortunately, is out for the year with a torn ACL, presumably will bleed into next year as well. Just a tough loss for an offense that's starting to fire a little bit. Curtis Samuel back in the fold. They're now, comfortably in the NFC playoff picture, and that is a big loss because they were targeting him early and often as soon as he got back. So it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back from another big loss there.
Yeah, let's mention one more injury. You mentioned Washington leaping in to the 6th seed in the NFC. The team that they have passed by in the last couple of weeks is Minnesota, and they're dealing with an injury as well with Adam Thielen, who has a high ankle sprain according to Adam Schefter. And those are always tricky with the timing. It really depends on how bad of a high ankle sprain it is. And it's probably virtually impossible for him to play here on Thursday night against Pittsburgh in what really becomes a must-win game for Minnesota. They're 5-7 on the outside looking in currently in the NFC playoff picture. And we've discussed this here on the show, but the future of Mike Zimmer and possibly GM Rick Spielman could be up in the air right now, especially after losing to a winless Lions team, and especially after seeing the defense play on that final possession. I mean, that was just really bad there. And, as I said, they're 5-7, a very important game coming up here against Pittsburgh now, and they most likely will not have Adam Thielen for this week and possibly more. So they're in a pretty tough situation there as well. And I think that team, if this keeps on skidding for them, that's definitely a team to watch once the season comes to an end.
Absolutely. Let's toss in a comment here from Percy Haskell about the Packers. He says Packers are going to start getting top players back soon. Darius Smith, Jair Alexander, David Bakhtiari, to name a few. And I'll just say that if you guys do have any questions, drop them in the chat, and we will try to answer them in here. This is a really good point by Percy, is that the Packers are getting healthy at the right time. I mentioned that the Ravens, the injuries start piling up. If the Packers can get some of these key players back in the back half of the season before they enter the playoff run, Packers are already one of the hotter teams in the NFL. They might really start emerging as the key contender for a Super Bowl title, because some of these other teams that we expected, like the Rams and some other teams, have dropped off a little bit. So if the Packers, they've already been successful, if they can start getting these pieces back, that's going to be really dangerous to watch here.
There's also some evidence of a correlation between a late bye week and playoff success. And so they're coming off their bye. They get the Chicago Bears at home at Lambeau. I think they're minus 12.5 against the spread there. So they are definitely trending in the best direction of all the contenders.
And we've said this before on the show, but what the Packers have done this year, especially on defense without Jair and without Zadarius Smith, a lot of credit goes out to their defensive coordinator, first-year defensive coordinator Joe Barry, and they've done a tremendous job, and they'll be getting Bakhtiari back here very soon. Jair Alexander and Zadarius Smith are two guys who they hope to get back as well. This is a team that has done phenomenal up until now. They're coming off a bye. Aaron Rodgers has been playing at an MVP level, and once they get all those guys back, again, we talked about Odell possibly joining them. No one talked about these three all-pro players who are possibly going to be coming back late in the season. So they have a lot of help coming back here to this team very soon, and they are a serious threat there in the NFC as they've shown up until now.
Let's just give some final thoughts for the show as well. And mine is just simply about tonight's game between the Patriots and the Bills. It's going to be a huge got some feedback going on here, I think. So it's just going to be a massive game for the Patriots to actually prove what they are this season, because obviously they're on the 6-game winning streak. They've had some easier games, I guess I would say, to this point. But this is the real test for them, to go up to Buffalo, to play the Buffalo Bills. Cold weather game. It's supposed to be windy. I know that Bill Belichick doesn't like those weather reports, but I think that we all know what the weather is going to be like in Buffalo tonight. And it's just Mac Jones has to prove himself as well in cold weather. I know that he put up some impressive stats last week and really his first cold weather game of the season. But this is a different element. Mac Jones didn't grade out particularly well in last week's game, despite his impressive stats. So it's just going to be a really fascinating game. Patriots entering it with the number 1 seed, but if they lose, then they would drop back down to the number 5 seed in the AFC playoff picture. So that would be a pretty precipitous drop if they actually do lose this game. And it's a good sign that, playoff seeding is still, it's a little bit early to be talking about all of that when a team can drop all the way from number 1 to number 5 with 1 loss. But certainly going to be a fun game between the Patriots and the Bills. Brad, what's your final thought?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, and I think it's interesting that the Miami Dolphins decided earlier this season to not take their bye week after they played in London, a tough loss against the Jaguars that kind of derailed their whole season. But they are the first team to say, hey, we don't want a bye week after London. They come home, they lose to the Atlanta Falcons, so 2 awful losses. But now 5 wins in a row. They get that late season bye week to get healthy, right the ship. They have the Jets in their first game out of the bye and could be 7-7 after being 1-7, which is just a remarkable turnaround.
That's a great takeaway there. It was actually my final thought as well. But I'm going to shift over to Seattle for a second, beating San Francisco there yesterday in a really, a game that they had just so many horrible turnovers there at the goal line. Gerald Everett had probably one of the worst games in his career there. But, this is a team that they get the win over San Francisco, and really they still have an uphill battle to make the playoffs. That's for sure. They're 4-8. But when you look at what they have left here this season, 3 out of their last 5 games are with Houston, Chicago, and Detroit. And they just beat San Francisco. They don't have a first-round pick next year. Who knows what's going to happen to Russell Wilson? I know they're still trying to go out and win. Yesterday was a big win for them. I know that it's going to be an uphill battle, but I would just say, what Seattle did yesterday and looking at what they have left, I think it's a team that will be trying out there to try to make a run here. It will be difficult, but when you look at their remaining schedule and what they have left there, it's a team that could have a chance if everything bounces the right way for them. So I think that's just a team just to keep an eye on here as the season progresses. It'll be a long shot for sure, but let's keep an eye on them.
Teams are stringing together these win streaks this season. Like I said, the Patriots are on a win streak, Washington, Miami Dolphins. This season is so unpredictable that it's really not out of the realm of possibility for the Seahawks to go on a run here and actually make the playoffs. And the Russell Wilson thing, certainly interesting to watch this offseason. I'm not sure what exactly will happen there, but I will say that around the league, I'd say that people are not expecting Russell Wilson to be back in Seattle next season. But going on a winning streak, making the playoffs, maybe going for a run, that could certainly change things as well. But thank you for watching PFF Now this week. Keep it on PFF.com for all of your news and analysis. Use promo code CYBER40. That's the last day that you can get 40% off all subscriptions to PFF.com. I know that I wrote a piece on Matthew Judon that you should check out but behind the paywall there, but follow Ari on Twitter at MySportsUpdate. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Throw me a follow at Doug Kyed, and we will be back with you guys again next week.